way, right? We are Midwesterners after all, so I'm glad you're here tonight for a very important meeting. And to those of you that are tuned into the live stream, we welcome you as well. And so I'm going to go through a few things right now. I want to first introduce the people that are up on the stage right now, because in years past, when we've done these meetings about General Conference, I've done them by myself usually. And the cool thing is there's a group of people that I asked, just because I know that they're going to dig into this stuff, they're going to drill into it, and help us navigate through this time. And so Chad Thomas is up here. Chad, just raise your hand. And Todd Stevenson's right here. And Kendra Kunkel over here. And Aaron Haven are up here and are going to help walk us through this tonight. Let's say thank you to them for all their hard work. They've been working with me to find things out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray for us, and then I'm going to walk us through, and then different people are going to talk at different times, but I'll start us through. If you did not get a packet that looks like this, please raise your hand and someone will bring you one. Okay, I'll ask Terry, do you mind bringing some packets around, Terry? Okay, raise your hand if you need a packet, because we're going to be walking through this thing step by step. The other thing I'll say is that if you need a pen, we can get you a pen, but we're gonna try and do the last over 30 minutes of your questions and answers. So we're going to give you a lot of information tonight and try not to make it like drinking from a fire hose, and then we'll do Q&A at the very end. So as looks like y'all are getting settled in, I want to invite you to close your eyes with me and bow your heads and let us pray. Lord God, I thank you for the faithful men and women and youth that you've gathered into this place tonight. I pray, Lord, that there will be your Holy Spirit will let there be a spirit of hope, a spirit of optimism, not fear, not anxiety. I pray that you be with us tonight, Lord, as we think about your church and how you want us to be your church. Bless our time together, produce fruit from it. In Jesus' name, all of God's people say, Amen. All right, what are we here to do? And I'm going to be crystal clear about this. This is a first meeting where we're going to do information and questions and answer. We're not here to debate. We're not here to argue. We're not even really here to advocate for anything yet, because it's too soon to advocate for anything. So we're going to be talking about some of the things that are going on in the United Methodist denomination. It's a worldwide denomination. I'm going to spend some time at the beginning and go quickly through some background information, because I realize that not everybody's up to speed on what has gotten us to this point and the things that have been out there in the media about the United Methodists are separating. That may or may not happen. And so you need to know what got us through that point. We are live streaming this tonight, and just so you know, the camera is going to be pointed down here at those presenting. Nobody will be singled out. The camera's not going to, and when we get to the question and answer period, you're going to have a mic, but the camera's not going to go on you. So you don't have to worry about, being out there, wherever that is. Right? So, unless you want to, Aaron, you can stand up and wave at will. Hey, here I am. I'm in church. Okay. Here's my expectations in all these kinds of meetings that we do. Is we expect courtesy and grace and love. And those are really kind of the guardrails and the guidelines. Courtesy, grace, and love is how we treat each other and how we'll talk to each other. And if you're all in favor of practicing courtesy, grace, and love tonight, say amen. All right, so here we go. Page number 1 of your packet is really basic. And again, it's a quick review about the United Methodist Church. We have conferences, and so up on the slide, up on the screen, you can see that basic thing, local church. And then every charge has a charge conference, and that can be a solo church or 2 or 3 churches that are a charge together will have a charge conference. And then we have an annual conference. The annual conference, in our case, the Iowa annual conference, are all the United Methodist churches between the rivers, the Mississippi and the Missouri, the Missouri River, the Missouri border, and the Minnesota border. We are the Iowa annual conference here in Iowa. We make decisions. If you go down, you can see that then there's a general conference. Conference. That is our legislative body in the United Methodist Church. It's how we've organized ourselves, right? Like our government. There are the bishops, you can see up on the screen, and there's the General Conference, and there's the Judicial Council. So we have executive, legislative, and judicial branches in the United Methodist Church. It's how we've organized ourselves. The General Conference meets every 4 years, unless there's a special called session. The General Conference is the voice of United Methodism. It is our rule book, if you will. It's where we set up, the book of discipline, where we set up the guidelines, and where we have stances. And if you go down there, you can see in the very bottom that the book of discipline has our Constitution, it has church rules, and it has social principles. Okay? So that's the basics of understanding. So if you're thinking, well, why can't we just vote on this quickly and be done with it? Because we've got a lot of layers and a lot of organization that we have to work through. And I'll say it again, we are a worldwide denomination. And the African United Methodist Church in several years will have more members than the North American United Methodist Church, just to let you know. And we're in Korea, in the Philippines, in Western Europe. And so we're a worldwide denomination. And the General Conference elects delegates to come, and you can read about that on the front of that page. Next slide is, what are we fighting about? If you don't know what we're fighting about, one of the ways to understand it is on the back side, on your yellow sheet. What we're fighting about in the big broad brush stroke is really the interpretation and the authority of Scripture. But it's presented itself in the official rules and positions of the United Methodist Church, in the Book of Discipline, and only the General Conference can change the Book of Discipline, in regards to qualifications for ordination and appointments in the United Methodist Church. Ordination standards, and then appointment, either as a pastor in a local church or in what says extension ministry, which is like a bishop or a district superintendent or some other capacity. And so on the back of your paper, that's where the rules are listed. And then in the social principles is where there's language that for conversations ease, we can say that it's restrictive language, all right? So I've had a cold all week. Qualifications for ordination. You can read about that on the back side so you understand why we're fighting about this. That our rules are no practicing self-avowed homosexual, not to be candidates ordained as ministers or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. And that's the heart of it. That's the heart of it. So how did we get to this point that in coming May, in several months, there's going to be a general conference up in Minneapolis, and we're looking at several different plans. How did we get here? And quickly, I know some of you have been on this journey, and so you know. And so if you look at page 3 in your packet, there's a lot of words there that I wrote, but it's basically this. Go back to 2016, General Conference in Portland, Oregon. In Portland, Oregon, after a lot of fighting and arguing about that language, the language of specific stances, the General Conference created a commission on the way forward. The commission on the way forward was a diverse group of people came together and said, we need to figure out a way to move forward as the United Methodist denomination. And at that time, it was, how can we move forward and still stay under the big umbrella of the United Methodist Church? How can we keep the institution intact and yet allow for people in different parts of the world, in different parts of the United States, to feel comfortable with our stances and our rules in regards to LGBTQ folks. So at that time, out of the Commission on the Way Forward, came a one church plan, a connectional conference plan, a simple plan, and a traditional plan. And when we hear traditional plan, it means basically keeping the existing stances and prohibitions and strengthening accountability that you see on the back side of the yellow sheet, page 2. So, a year ago, in February, we were in St. Louis, called Special General Conference. And we went down there, and, I was a delegate then, and part of the mood and the attitude and the feeling was that the one church plan was a slam dunk, that it was going to get passed. It seemed like all the official apparatus of the United Methodist Church and the bishops and everyone else saying this is just going to be a done deal. What happened was that General Conference adopted the traditional plan, They rejected one church plan, connectional conference plan, simple plan, traditional plan, and strengthened the language and the consequences for violation of the Book of Discipline. BOD is always Book of Discipline. All right? Then what happened? Tried to have a gracious exit and to allow for churches that didn't agree that they could leave with their property and their assets. And that didn't go so well. There was a high exit fees. Then the centrists joined the progressives and resisted the enhanced Book of Discipline rules. Before we left the auditorium in St. Louis, the Western jurisdiction, for example, and those conferences, stood up and said, we are not going to abide by this Book of Discipline. And so some bishops and some annual conferences officially rejected this. And, I guess this next slide, I just sum it up as chaos and anger and mistrust has grown. We've experienced it in the Iowa Annual Conference. We've experienced it in local churches, including this one, that attendance and participation and money began to decline because it was withheld by people on both sides, if you will. And some people moved their membership. And so the Iowa Annual Conference, remember, that's here between the rivers, we've experienced huge declines in a lot of things. And we've experienced, sadly, an increase in this kind of mistrust. And so I would sum that up by saying this is my opinion on this slide, and we're still on page 3, is that we've not been united in areas of theology and interpretation of Scripture for 40 years or more, for 40 or more years. And now we're not united in support for all or parts of the institutional church. After we left St. Louis, what I'm trying to say is it was, however you want to phrase it, game on, game off, but once upon a time the general conference could speak for the church and it would be in the Book of Discipline. And after we left St. Louis, it was more outright rejection of that. And so now, understand what I'm saying. We existed for many years as a denomination, not united in our theology, in our interpretation of Scripture and understanding of it. In the last year, we have not been united in agreement on the structure, the Book of Discipline. And so that's the other thing, the way I sum that up, is that as I've observed it in the last year, few people are happy, nobody's winning, the denomination remains at war, there's anxiousness, and our public witness to the unchurched and de-churched is horrible. That last part of that statement, if you agree with that, say yes. It's horrible. We Methodists fighting amongst ourselves and causing conflict with families. It's like we've become as bad as our political parties in the United States. That's my opinion. So, as we move forward, understand, just for clarity's sake, who what I call the internal or the influential players and general stances are. As we go walk through these different plans, is that, as you can see on the screen, the conservative or traditional group of folks, influential pastors, laity, conferences, bishops, and they basically want to keep the existing Book of Discipline and strengthen accountability enforcement. The centrists and progressives are, you can see, that's another very influential people, and they're also all around the United States. Marriage between two people and LGBTQ ordination and appointment. There's another emerging that I put up here, the Liberationist and Queer Clergy Caucus, that, very little sexual prohibitions, and of course LGBT ordination and appointments. And that group of folks is interesting. They're kind of emerging, that they are kind of fighting with and at odds, some of them, with the centrist and progressive folks. And then you have the Africans. You have the Africans, and I told you just a minute ago that in a few years, the African church, those churches will have more members than the United States. And the Africans, they want to keep the existing Book of Discipline and strengthen it and the enforcement, but they don't want to lose the cross and flame and the brand that has come with the United Methodist Church. So we've got kind of an interesting conundrum here. Fair enough? But I want you to understand who the players are. And combinations of these players have formed new plans or protocols for General Conference. And I want to say this. Never, ever forget that there are faithful, well-meaning people on all sides of this debate. Can you all agree with me on that? Just say yes. Okay, we don't demonize anybody. So these are folks that are very intentional, very thoughtful, very loving, that have said, man, we need to figure out a way to stop fighting and stop declining. And I think that's something to hold on to, that it's the heart of some of these different plans that are coming out. It's to do that, to say we need to stop fighting. Now, when I brought this task force together, we started working off this really cool simplified poster of all the options. So instead of handing this to you all, we have worked on condensing it down, because this is a mess, but it's a good mess. It's a thoughtful mess of people trying to do things and do the right things. What I asked this group to do is to take a look at this and say, let me make sure I'm keeping up here, that I felt there were 3 plans that probably have the most juice, if you will, the most influential folks behind them, but nothing's a done deal, okay? So the key thing, though, is what these folks are going to talk about tonight is one of the differences of past plans is that there is an open acknowledgement that the United Methodist Church needs to be smart and make a plan for how to divorce and what to do with the kids and what to do with the property. That's the simplest way I can put it. There's open acknowledgement, and the influential leaders are deeply involved. Keep in mind the following, and I mean this, and I mean this to those that are watching this, around the state, that nothing is a done deal yet. That protocol legislation for the protocols that Todd's going to talk about, that's legislation's been written. It's got to be passed. And then it's got to go to annual conferences. On your piece of paper on page 4, you can read about these different steps that have to take place. And there's several areas where amendments or changes can be made, and then the Judicial Council could rule them out of order. And I'm being realistic about this. I am a cradle Methodist, United Methodist, and as I said to a group of colleagues last week, sometimes I think on the General Conference level, we might follow the same playbook as the Iowa Democratic Party. And if there's a way to mess it up, we're going to mess it up, okay? And I'm not putting any Democrats under the bus. I'm just acknowledging what happened last week with our caucuses. Amen? And so what I'm saying as a Methodist and somebody that's deeply invested in this is there's a lot of water that's got to come under the bridge before we get to Minneapolis at General Conference. Does that sound fair to everybody? So just keep it in mind and take a breath is what I'm saying. And the other way I'd said that to my colleagues is, hey, man, if your hair's on fire, put it out. There's a lot of stuff that's still going to come. So I'm going to ask Aaron Haven to come up, and he's going to hit some of the high points of the Indianapolis plan, just so that you're aware of it.
Is it on? Okay. Must not have checked the height on this first, but so yeah, I'm Aaron Haven. I'm a member here at Grandview, and Tom had asked us to help him out with the presentation of this and just gathering of information. And so I want to share with you kind of the highlights of the Indianapolis plan. It's called the Indianapolis plan because I think that's where the people gathered to work out the framework for this. And framework, I think, is a key word for the Indianapolis plan. There are she's used to working a microphone. The Indianapolis plan is a framework of there's not a whole lot of details or how to do things. The intent of the formers of this was to allow those details to be worked out by the delegates as they're led by the Holy Spirit at General Council or General Conference. But I just want to touch on some of the highlights of them. First of all, the Indianapolis plan, like a lot of the other protocols and plans, would be creating at least 2 global United Methodist denominations from the current United Methodist Church denomination. Those 2 new denominations each could use the same United Methodist Church name, they would just include a modifier, for example, like the traditional United Methodist Church or the centrist United Methodist Church. So it breaks it into the traditional and the centrist and progressive. And there's also opportunity for the progressive, for example, to break off from the centrist if there's enough people and churches and conferences that desire that. So the traditionalist denomination would retain the current and enhanced book of discipline language on human sexuality, LGBTQ priests or pastors and bishops, and the enhanced accountability that was put into place with the traditional plan in St. Louis. And included in this, the international central conferences by default would go into the traditionalist denomination, whereas here in the United States, the default denomination for United States would be into the centrist. And the centrist denomination would remove the current language from the Book of Discipline. The restrictive language would be removed. However, annual conferences and even local congregations would be able to decide on their own, as part of the centrist denomination, what stance to take on any of those issues, whether or not to host same-sex weddings, whether the pastors can officiate same-sex weddings. All of those would be up to the conferences and the local congregations. And again, a progressive denomination could form if enough annual conferences or local congregations desire it. I believe the numbers in there are 50 local congregations could get together and form a new denomination, or I believe at least one annual conference could do that. A simple majority vote is all that's required. If you are a United States United Methodist annual conference, a simple majority vote by your delegates would be all that's needed to move to a different denomination other than the centrist one. And likewise with local congregations, if a special charge conference is called to hold a vote that you do not want to stay in the same denomination as your current conference and you want to leave that to go to someplace else, a simple majority vote of the church is all that's required there. And if you do desire to move, it's a gracious exit. You can retain your property and assets and move to a different conference. Clergy are allowed to align with a different annual conference than what they're currently at if they do not agree personally with the stance of the conference that they're aligned with, and their pension liability then transfers to whichever conference they choose to align with, so they get to take their pension with them. And then various organizations that work on behalf of have worked on behalf of the United Methodist denomination, such as Westpath, which handles all the clergy pensions, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, United Methodist Men and Women, and the Publishing House. Those will continue as separate organizations. They will not be necessarily aligned with any one of the denominations, and so any and all denominations, churches that desire to use their services would be allowed to. So I think that's it for the Indianapolis plan. Again, the expectation of it is by the writers was that the Holy Spirit would lead the delegates in perfecting and finalizing the legislation in Minneapolis. So there's a lot of room and things that could still change, but I think the framework is there for that. Thank you.
I used to be taller. Now I'm rounder.
Do we need to have Joey come up? She's like our roadie. She's our...
I gotta set this out. My name's Todd Stevenson. I've been a member here with my family for a number of years. I'm not sure exactly how many. But like a lot of you, I have a cell phone. I get alerts on it. And I don't know, about a month or so, maybe longer now, I got a little note, and it said the Methodist Church has decided to separate into two different entities over gay marriage. And I thought, that's interesting. I've been following this, and I didn't know anybody voted on that. I didn't know anything happened. And then I started getting a few text messages from folks that know what's going on. And what happened actually was a group of people got together, some bishops and some folks that have a dog in this fight, for lack of a better word. And conservative folks, traditional, whatever you want to call them, I'm going to use some terms. I'm not trying to put anybody in a pigeonhole or anything like that. But folks that are leaders of traditional, conservative, progressive, liberal, whatever you want to call them, got together with some bishops and decided that it's time for the church to break apart over this issue of gay, lesbian marriage ordination. And this is how we want to make it happen. So what people need to understand is that the protocol is really nothing but an agreement between 16 people that got together that represent these different groups. And it's a pledge, basically, by them that we're going to use the clout that we have with our groups in order to try to get a dissolution made here that can be as peaceful and clean and hopefully quick as possible so that people can get on and start doing what they want to do. The protocol calls for legislation to be prepared because, as Tom said, that's the only way this can happen is if the General Conference passes legislation to make it work. And that finally got released, I think, last Saturday. So it's been out there for maybe 3 or 4 days for people to look at. I looked at it briefly. It's 33 pages long, single-spaced. Then I found a summary of it, and that was 34 pages long. So, there's got to be something out there somewhere to help us a little bit. So I'm going to try to do that. But what I encourage you to do is, number one, go to the website, the United Methodist Church website. That has the information on it. There's lots of blogs, lots of other groups that have things on both sides of this issue. But the Methodist Church really has a great website. It has this information on it. You can read it for yourself, and you can understand it. What I've read in the press, for lack of a better word, or seen on TV is not accurate completely. They got the news, they ran with it, and I think it's been misreported, and I think it's causing a lot of confusion out there. So the legislation got released. There are 2 different conferences that are going to vote, supposedly, to send that legislation to the General Conference. One in Michigan, and the other one is in Sierra Leone. They're meeting, it looks like, the first week of March. And they have to pass that, one of those 2, in order to get it to the General Conference. If it doesn't pass, then it's not going to get there. And only then can the General Conference consider this legislation about how the church is going to be divided. What we really need to understand here is that if this passes, it will create the opportunity for a new church to form. And they're ready to go. It will be the traditionalist church that gets formed. They were ready to leave our church years ago. They have a book of discipline put together. They have their rules. They know what they want to do, and they're ready to do that. So they're going to branch off. And once that occurs, I wonder if it's on another slide here. There? Okay, that's cool. The new church, for lack of a better word, will be traditional. It's going to keep the same prohibitions right now that were approved. And they'll be filing something as soon as our General Conference ends on May 15 of 2020. And at that point in time, annual conferences can then start considering what they want to do as far as that new affiliation goes. If they do nothing, they will stay in what I'm calling the old Methodist Church, or the one that we have right now. It is proposed, I don't know that it will happen for sure, but it is the plan anyway, that the old church that remains will be changing their laws, their regulations, their rules about same-sex marriage, ordination of gays and lesbians. And if so, then annual conferences will remain in that church, that general conference, until they vote to leave it. So if you do nothing, you stay with the old church. We assume the traditional language is going to be removed from the Book of Discipline so that it can be more progressive on these issues. So what happens if an annual conference decides they want to go to the traditional church? They need to take a vote. I think it's a 57%, it's on one of these slides. Second one right here. There we go. So the annual conference would have to vote by 57% majority to align with the new denomination that would be created. If it doesn't pass, it's going to stay in the current one. What that would then trigger is local church action if they wanted to do so. So for example, if the Iowa Annual Conference decided they want to go to the new traditional church, new and traditional don't really go together, but that's what I'm using it as a name for them. If they want to go there, they need to vote, and if it passes, that's where the annual conference slides over to. After that, local churches can then take some action and decide, do we want to stay or not stay? If the local church wants to stay with where the annual conference went, there's nothing that they need to do. They just stay there. If they decide, no, we want to go back to the old church, which is now progressive, hopefully, according to the legislation that they plan to adopt, then there would need to be a vote at the local level by the local church. And the board would have to decide, the ad board would have to decide what kind of vote do we want. They can choose, it can be a 50%, just simple majority vote, 51 out of 100, and it's going to change, or they could require a 2/3 vote. And that's something the ad board would decide and then put it to the congregation to vote. So right now, is there really anything for the local church to do? And the answer to that is probably no, until we know what's actually going to happen at General Conference. These plans may not be adopted. We don't know. So there's nothing to do at this point. After the General Conference, if the protocol is adopted that I'm talking about, then the church needs to see what the annual conference decides to do. And if they're not happy with what the annual conference decided to do, then they can take their own vote at that point in time. But right now, we don't really know what the remaining church is going to look like, and we won't know that until legislation is proposed and adopted. A lot of people assume it's going to be more progressive in their thinking and in their marriage and ordination rules, but that is not a done deal at this point in time. I think that's about all I have on that. Yeah. And then, there's money changing hands here as well, and pension things that are being protected also. And if the local church decides to do something different than the annual conference, there would not be fees paid, things like that. Currently, if the local church would decide to disaffiliate, there'd be things that have to be paid, pension obligations, as well as the assessments would have to be paid in full, plus a few years extra in order to make that separation. So I think that's about all I have for this, and we'll just wait and see what happens, I guess, in May. And if you know people, I know we're going to publish some information about folks that are going to the General Conference and Annual Conference. So if you have opinions on these things, by all means, let folks know how you feel and what it is that you'd like to do. And then, the last thing, I guess, on this slide, really there's nothing we have to do as far as a drop-dead date until December of 2024. It would be the last time for a local church to opt out of where their annual conference might be. And hopefully before that, things shake out.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Let's say thanks to Todd. And I know it's like, the one thing that we're doing, Grandview, is what we're doing now. And I'd say that to Cheryl and East Dubuque and Center Grove. And is there any other churches represented here? I know that Epworth and some others are invited. We stay informed. That's why we're doing this. We stay informed with facts so that, as Todd said, people don't run around with their hair on fire and say things that aren't true. So, the one thing I think is important to say is this, and this comes from the experience of a year ago. I referred to it earlier, but I think I need to say this about there's a possibility that nothing gets passed, no plan gets passed. And I'm putting that out there because a lot of the deep hurt my opinion is that the one church plan was oversold by our bishops and other leaders and apparatus in the United Methodist Church. So therefore, people that maybe weren't deeply following it, when the word came out that the traditional plan had been modified and strengthened, there were a lot of really hurt feelings, and some of you know what I'm talking about. Therefore, I think it's fair to put this out here that, we can get to Minneapolis, and because we're United Methodists and we're smart, interesting, peculiar people, and we have opinions, and there's legislative process and Robert's Rules of Order, that you got to watch and see, and there's a possibility nothing gets passed. And I know that this is complex in my conversations with our friends, my friends in Nigeria that I love and trust. Many of the Africans are saying, hey, we won in St. Louis. Why do we have to leave and form our new traditional denomination? And more than that, is why I write back and forth to them. They say, we'll have the votes this year, and we're going to have more votes in 4 years. So I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. I'm saying be aware. But if nothing is passed, we need to be prepared for that. Okay? As Todd said, if Grandview, for example, said, we just want to be non-denominational. Okay, we could do that tomorrow, start the process. But it means we'd have to negotiate for this building and the grounds. Because of the trust clause, it means that currently the Iowa Annual Conference would say, okay, Grandview, you don't want to be United Methodist? Then give us the keys, or we'll just come in and change the locks, and good luck. See ya. So be clear on that. What I want to invite Chad to come up and talk about a little bit is another piece of information that's in your packet, and it's like a flow chart. And again, it's another way to make sense of this. So Chad, if you want to, I'll try and adjust the microphone. I can't remember how tall you are.
Hi, I'm Chad Thomas. I'm a member here at Grandview and been so for several years. And I just wanted to talk real briefly about trying to simplify the idea of what's going to happen here as things progress over the next few months and years. So after General Conference, we will see whether new legislation is passed that determines if there will be new denominations of United Methodism. So on the left side, the protocol and the Indianapolis plan are lumped together because they do have some major differences, but the general idea around both will be the same. There will be 2 or more new denominations. By default, annual conferences and local churches would remain in the centrist denomination if they do nothing, or could vote to move to the traditionalist denomination. So the first thing that would happen, the Iowa Annual Conference would make that decision, and then Grandview would make their decision depending on what the Iowa Annual Conference does. And again, if the Iowa Annual Conference does nothing, they would remain centrist. If Grandview does nothing, then they would remain in the centrist denomination. I believe the hope of everyone involved, although as Todd said it's not guaranteed, is that the centrist denomination would remove the language regarding LGBT people from the Book of Discipline. So it would remain for the traditionalists but leave for the the centrist. But again, we don't know for sure that that's going to happen. It seems to be that that's everyone's intention, though. As Tom said, there's also the possibility that neither of these plans, no other plans are passed. In that scenario, we would remain under the United Methodist Church. The traditional plan that was passed in 2019 would remain the law of both the Iowa Annual Conference and, in theory, Grandview. There is some speculation that the language would be enforced at a greater rate, strengthened, so to speak. It's not really clear if Iowa Annual Conference would really have any options other than to stay under the traditional plan. They could perhaps follow the lead of some of the Western jurisdiction that Tom referenced that came out and announced that they would not obey the new, or the Book of Discipline as adopted. Depending on what they do, then Grandview would have somewhat limited options of either just remaining within the Iowa Annual Conference and the large United Methodist Church, or disaffiliating completely from the United Methodist Church, becoming a non-denominational church. What that would look like, obviously, there's probably more questions than answers, certainly at this point. There certainly would be financial implications to that as well. One thing that the Indianapolis plan and that the protocols have worked really hard to do is to make it so churches can align with either the centrist denomination or the traditionalist denomination without suffering financially. So that's the flow chart of what we expect to happen. We don't want to, one thing we've talked about as kind of this group up here is we don't want to speculate too much on what we think is going to happen. We have some ideas of what seem to be the popular options, but given what happened in 2019, it's kind of hard to predict anything. The best thing to do at this point, I think, is to just monitor the situation, try to stay informed, try to stay educated, be prepared for any eventuality. After General Conference 2020, we'll have a much better idea of where we go from here. But again, part of our job up here is to help everyone in the congregations to stay informed. So this is what we've kind of laid out as what we expect to happen as a rough framework over the next few months and years. All right.
Thanks, Chad. There's a next piece of paper in your packet that Chad wrote, and there you go. It's kind of a summary, and that's in there for your reading. And so we want to move to this. Excuse me, right now, and this is that next piece in your packet, and I'll invite Kendra to come and share some thoughts about this and how this came about. Let's make sure we're.
Good. Hello, I'm Kendra Kunkel, and I came to this committee with little bit of information. So I was one of the people on here confused. Anybody else with me? Yeah, okay. So what I did learn about this was from Pastor Tom's Sunday information sharing and the media. That's all I knew at this point. On January 22nd, Pastor Tom sent out an email to each one of us with various sites that we could go and explore on the web. And there is a repeat of all of those sites in your packet on the last page. I have checked out those sites and read the information, and I can share that they represent all the different sides of the issues. So it's definitely non-biased, so it covers everything. You're going to find on the second to the last page of your packet a list of basic questions that you might have. At least I did. There are questions there that apply to the general church, the entire church, and there are also questions there, how does this impact Grandview Church? My favorite question that is posed on this is, can't we just ignore this whole mess? Pastor Tom graciously answered each question for the benefit of all of us. I am definitely a visual learner, so I'm very appreciative of having this packet of information so that I can go from question to question and read the answers there. If you have not already been reading and learning from the sites that Pastor Tom outlined, I definitely encourage you to begin. It is a lot of information to learn and understand. As you can see from just tonight, it's confusing what all of this means. There's a lot of information there for us. But thank you to this team for breaking it all down for us and giving us a lot of good stuff.
Let's thank Kendra. Again, she did do a lot of reading and a lot of thinking. And the value, which was really cool, is, one of, like maybe the second meeting we had, is it's valuable to have someone with outside eyes, so to speak, that hasn't been on this trudge, this long slog. We started having some informational meetings back in 2015 before I went to General Conference in 2016. And so it was invaluable. And that's where that frequently asked questions and some of my answers came from. But right now, I want to open it up. And I thought we got some microphone runners here. Again, if you have a question... okay. We'll just, grab a couple. That'd be helpful. We'll take these around, and I'll have these folks up here. You can hand this one around to answer a question. But again, we want to open it up, and we'll do the very best we can to clarify. And I think those are on. Are those on? Yep. Okay. We'll do our very best to clarify. If you have a question, because again, I wanted to allow plenty of time for this, so that we can, end confusion, so we try to answer your questions. So fire away. Oh, I see everybody wants to go home early. So. And again, we won't film you, just so you know, we don't want you to feel self-conscious of being online. Vicki, what you got?
I'm really curious. Is the General Conference before the Iowa Conference?
Yes.
What sense does that make at all?
Well, that's a very good question. Because many times the General Conference will pass some constitutional amendments or some other things. Those have to then go to every annual conference in the world for a 2/3 vote to be ratified. So that's actually I know, it's a timing thing. We Methodists, we like our committees and all that stuff, but General Conference typically meets in May. Annual conferences for most in North America meet in June. And then every 4 years there's a jurisdictional conference that meets to elect bishops. And like we're in the north central jurisdiction. So they meet in July, they elect a bishop, new bishop comes in September. The African conferences tend to hold their conference sessions in November and December. And again, it's that ratification thing. So it was a great question. There are no dumb questions, by the way.
Hey, Tom, if the churches, if some of them separate, on the bottom of that, there was $25 million or something on there.
Yep.
Is there enough money if a lot of churches separate?
Yeah, that's a good question about the money, and any of you guys can jump in and interrupt me.
I can do that. The $25 million is called for in the protocol and in that legislation, and it goes to fund the new denomination that is going to be splitting apart from the current church. There's also, I think, $39 million that's going to be earmarked for racial, social issues, things like that have been underserved or that need more support because of the separation. And there's also another $2 million fund that's set aside in case there's maybe a third or fourth or fifth group that decides they want to form a new denomination other than the traditional one.
Yep. So, and let me add to that, the negotiation, when you look at the protocols, a professional, highly regarded negotiator, mediator came in. He's the guy that did the 911 compensation fund or something like this, some big high-profile thing, a Jewish man, and he walked those 16 folks through this. So that's where you see some interesting things like 57% majority on a vote. That's an odd number. Compromise. The money. The United Methodist Church, boards and agencies, that's such insider language. But we have all this organization and structure in the United States, but certainly in the world. So when we say boards and agencies, I mean like the Board of Higher Education and Campus Ministry, the Board of Church and Society, the Board of Global Ministries, UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief. We have those, nationally. Some of those are headquartered in Nashville and in Atlanta, Georgia. And like when we pay apportionments, that's what it goes to. Now I'm getting to your question, Ken. Some of our boards and agencies in the United Methodist Church on the national level have hundreds of millions of dollars in cash reserves. So if for some folks, the $25 million that's going to be paid to the traditional folks to split off, for some people, and we're Methodists, we fight about this. For some people, they're saying, what? We have hundreds of millions of cash reserve and we only get 25. And other people say, why do you get anything? But the money in cash reserves is there, and the money in assets. There's a lot of wealth in the United Methodist Church, Inc. Okay, let's just put it that way. Hospitals, colleges, orphanages. I mean, you can start going through all these institutions. So we've tried to give you simple things, but understand those are some of the issues that people are fighting over right now. And so if the protocols were to pass, again, what kind of going over some old ground, but the Wesleyan Covenant Association is a group of traditionalist leaders that after 2016 said, we need to get on the ball and set up a new denomination because we can't live with this. All the fighting and the anger and everything else. So the Wesleyan Covenant Association represents at this time the traditionalists, what would be the traditionalist denomination, but they don't represent all traditionalists. I want you to hear me say that. Not everybody loves the Wesleyan Covenant Association, but the Wesleyan Covenant Association has created a draft of a book of discipline. They have the beginnings of a publishing house already set up. And so that's why in the negotiations, they looked at this and said, the traditional side of the church is years ahead of creating a new denomination. So $25 million over 4 years to help that. Here's $2 million if, for example, if the liberationist folks say we don't think the centrist/progressive goes far enough and we want to start our own new denomination. There's $2 million for that. So a lot of money out there. But I hope we answered that, Ken. JC. Or no, it's Dan's.
I just have a general question about the United Methodist Church globally. I know it started with some English folks that came over to the United States. So I guess my first question is the United States the sort of the main global main figure in terms of the conferences and all? Is there a conference in England and Europe, for example? And
yes.
What would their view be on this?
The United Methodist Church, I'll give you as quick, as succinct as I can. The Methodist movement started in England as part of the Anglican Church. And so some of these Anglican/Methodist folks came to the New World, came here pre-Revolutionary War. Then when the Revolutionary War started, the quick, easy answer, I'm being very general, is many of the folks, the Anglican folks, went back to England because they were loyal to the king. So it left the Methodist people going, hey, who's going to baptize our babies and serve us communion? And so John Wesley ordained Thomas Coke, Francis Asbury to be bishops so they could come to the United States and ordain pastors. So in some ways, that part of the Methodist Episcopal movement took on a very North American flavor. And then the Methodist Episcopal Church, then the Evangelical United Brethren Church, the German Methodists here in North America, grew. 1968 merged. Much of what's going on in the other countries then started in the 30s or so with us, our Methodist Episcopal churches, going to Africa and the Philippines and the others to start churches there. So, for example, part of the reason God sent us to Domke, Nigeria is that when I found out that the Muslims had kicked out the Christian missionaries from the Evangelical United Methodist Church in the Nebraska Conference in 1932. They kicked the missionaries out, and there was a little remnant of Christians there. It was a good example. So we went back and did that. Now, England and these other places have expressions of Methodism, but they are not necessarily United Methodist. So what the breakdown is basically this, Dan, is, again, it's like, as I said, in the United States, we know we're divided. We've got our camps. In most of Africa, the United Methodist Church is a strong brand. It's growing phenomenally. And they're proud to be United Methodists in most of Africa. Same for the Philippines. Pretty strong growth, for the most part traditional. The Korean United Methodist Church also is growing and seems to be traditional. Europe, when you get into some of the European places, Germany and others, they tend to be more centrist, but they're still United Methodists. There aren't as many of them. So is that helpful to know that kind of how we are?
Yeah, right. I was just curious if the European conference, if there's such a, what their thoughts might be on this, and if they'd be important in.
They definitely. Let me add to that, Dan, quickly. They definitely have a dog in the hunt, so to speak, and rightly so, because they have been part of the United Methodist family, which includes, for some of the European ones and so forth, contributions, apportionments. For the Africans, not so much, but, they have a dog in the hunt because they're still developing the United Methodist Church, and they have deep connections with the Board of Global Ministries and some funding and things like that. So they're all paying attention in a really big way right now. So I hope that was helpful and I didn't muddy it. Again, I was trying to be quick and give you part of a semester's worth of United Methodist history from seminary. And if Dr. Collier is watching, I hope I got it right. So, okay. Other questions? Yeah.
So I can assume as we speak here tonight that we're traditionalists? So are we traditionalists?
I don't think we can assume that, Aaron. Okay.
I mean, are we or aren't we? As Grandview today?
Yeah.
Where are we at?
That's a great question. And I think when people ask me this a lot, and they ask me, if Grandview's going to vote, how are they going to vote? And so one of the things I point back to is our recent congregational assessment tool. We did that big church survey, and 190 people took it. It was interesting how we came out. We were scored in the CAT, the Congregational Assessment Tool, as high theologically conservative. Okay, not close to centrist, high. Now, what does that mean? It means theologically conservative means a high view of the Bible, belief in some of the basic Christian doctrines like the incarnation and resurrection of Jesus. I mean, some of the Apostles' Creed stuff. And then when it came to our social beliefs, Grandview was all over the place. Meaning that as I try to explain to people, and as I've come to know, over 400 active people here, is we have folks all over the place on LBGT issues, abortion, immigration, all what we think of as social issues. We're not neatly defined. We are not neatly defined at all. So, if we walk through this, because I'm going to keep going, because you're kind of trying to imagine this, right? So there are these scenarios that we're trying to look at right now. So let's say that the protocols pass, which means that it opens the door that an annual conference can leave the United Methodist Church, as it currently is, with all their property and all their assets, no harm, no foul. There's some details in there about pensions and back apportionments, but that's got to be worked out. So protocols pass, an annual conference, they can decide to vote, are we going to stay United Methodist, centrist, progressive, or is there a feeling conference-wide that we're going to go traditional? That's the first decision. The Iowa Annual Conference, and this is on your key dates, significant dates on your back page. We're tentatively already looking at a date in October 2020 to have the conversations if the protocols or Indianapolis plan passes. Okay? So then, as Todd said, and as Aaron talked about, and Chad, if the Iowa Annual Conference says we're going to stay United Methodist, that means we can have a conversation, and I think that we must have that conversation, and I think that it might be valuable to even get so far as to have some kind of a vote so that people know, because that's the heart of your question, right, my friend? You want to know. And at this point, nobody knows. So if the conference votes in October, says we're going to stay United Methodist, centrist, progressive, then Grandview would look at that, study it, pray about it, be in conversation about it. And if we move, the ad board says, all right, we're gonna have a charge conference. And we let the district superintendent know. We call a charge conference. Ad board decides, is it going to be a simple majority, 57%, or 2/3? What do you call 2/3? Like a super majority? We'd have our charge conference. And we'd talk, and we'd listen, and we'd vote. And of course, the other scenarios, it could go the other way, right? Iowa Annual Conference goes traditional. Grandview says, hey, we want to vote on this. We don't think we want to be traditional. Traditional meaning that it's basically the United Methodist Church as it is now, with the Book of Discipline and prohibitive language. There's going to be some differences in both denominations that I want you to hear me say. The traditional Methodist denomination looks attractive to many people because it's going to be created with a fourth, maybe a quarter of the kind of bureaucracy and boards and agencies that our traditional, with our current United Methodist Church has. So some people that I've listened to look at that and say, well, that means that our apportionments would go way down. Yeah, they would. But what's also going to happen is that it's happening right now in the Iowa Annual Conference right now, because of the declines that we've had in people and money, is that the Iowa Annual Conference is looking at going from a $14 million budget to $6 or $7 million budget, which means that everybody's apportionment is going to go down. Why am I telling you this? I don't think we need to make that decision based on apportionments. Y'all with me on that? I don't think so. That's my opinion. Okay, but that's where, Aaron, I think I can't call that right now. I don't know. And down the road, there's a likelihood that and this goes for East Dubuque and Center Grove and Sherrill and St. Luke's and others, but whoever's represented here, Center Grove, Rockdale, East Dubuque, Sherrill, St. Luke's, we may all have to have that meeting, that charge conference meeting, and it may be a hard meeting.
So are we guided by the BOD?
We are right now.
So that would be traditional.
Right now.
Okay.
But right now, that's a perspective. Is that right now the United Methodist Church, as it is constituted, is what we would think of as a traditional Methodist denomination. But again, part of the conflict are the folks that say we're not going to abide by those rules, and then if bishops don't uphold them and don't enforce them, then you got people that are on both sides theologically and socially even going, wow, this is getting really kind of scary for me as a pastor or for us as a local church because we're not sure which rules are going to be enforced and which ones aren't. Is that fair? If you work in a company, some of you here work at John Deere. How does that work out at John Deere if your supervisors or leaders only enforce some rules some of the time? It just depends on who you are. Are you cool with that? Anybody? No, be honest, you're not. So that's the mess we're in.
So if we're traditional, as we speak, then we're not breaking away from nothing if we stay traditional. It's everybody else that's breaking away. The people that said, I'm not going to go by the BOD.
That's certainly a perspective on that.
Is that what I'm looking at here? Or
that's a perspective. Todd, you want to say anything about that? Because that's out there. I mean, people are mad. They're going, why are the traditionalists have to go?
If nothing happens at the general conference, then, yep, that's the way we stay. And then a local church would have to make a decision if they want, for some reason, to then leave. There's a process to follow that's in the Book of Discipline right now. I talked about it a little bit. You got to do the vote. You got to pay your apportionments. You got to take care of the pension, and then you can go. That's an option that's been there forever, probably, you
Yep.
know. And churches do that, you know. Just say we're the Church of Jesus, and away we go. But the plan is, under the protocol, is that traditional group is going to break away and form a new denomination, because I think they're just tired of this whole deal being an issue every year, then every 4 years. They're ready to go. They have been ready to go, and they're just going to say, you know what? We're taking off. You guys do what you want to do. We know what we want to do, and this is the way we're going. And then the folks that stay, they're going to have decisions to make. You know, what is it going to look like? What is going to be changed in the book of discipline? Are there just going to be words taken out that some people find offensive? Are there going to be words added? We don't know for sure. There's legislation that's been proposed and talked about, but that's not a done deal at all. It's not just going to be an automatic as soon as that vote is taken.
No, I think that's well put, and I would only add to that and I don't know if you guys want to chime into that, but yeah, one path of least resistance that Todd's kind of talking about is if an annual conference, if the protocols pass or something like them pass and there's a gracious exit, if the conference says we're going to stay United Methodist, and if a church, whether it's a church of 15 or a church of 500, says, you know, for the most part, we can live with that. You know what I mean? Like, that's called, there were names for it last year that I used to speak that language. I don't speak it anymore. Like, I'm a compatibilist. I can, you know, there'll be churches say, yeah, probably the post-separation Methodist church, after the traditional leaves, they're going to probably right away strike that language. Go back to your yellow sheet on the back side. They're going to strike that probably as soon as possible, is the thinking. And so there'll be some churches say, you know, we think we can live with that. I mean, it may not be our personal, you know, theology or social belief, but we value staying together as a Christian community in this particular place more than we value that. There's going to be some churches vote that way. There's going to be some churches, as Todd said, that see themselves as more traditional, that the reason they came to the table and the reason those leaders agreed to this protocol is exactly right. They said, we're just tired of this. We're tired of fighting about this. We're tired of money and prayers and all these things going into this internal fight when the world's on fire, right? And so that's what led the traditionalist folks, both WCA and not necessarily Wesleyan Covenant Association, to say, yeah, we're fine. You can have, it'd be like, go to a divorce. It's like the traditional folks said, we want out of this marriage so bad, you keep the house, keep the cars, keep most of the bank accounts, all right? We just need a little bit to kind of get going, but God bless you, good luck. Does that make sense? That's part of what's fueled this. And there's a lot of energy around that, and you can't deny that. So is that helpful to bring a little more clarity or not?
This is really confusing.
I know. And the thing is that most people don't want conflict, and we don't want to fight. Is that fair? Thomas?
So we're certainly not lacking for historical precedents for splits between the church, Christianity evolving out of Judaism, Martin Luther, Anglican Church, all this division. I mean, it's kind of like a broken record at this point in time. Are we basing this decision actually based on what's worked and what hasn't worked in the past, and trying to kind of learn our lesson to make sure that it goes well for all parties?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's that answer is going to be dependent on who you talk to, meaning this. If you talk to somebody that's a much smarter church historian than I am, Thomas, they're going to look back to when we divided in 1844 over slavery. So you had the Methodist Episcopal Church North, Methodist Episcopal Church South. And again, I think that was 1844, predated the Civil War, and tried to do that kind of a split of the Methodist Episcopal Church. And I think if I'm getting my dates right, that there was a lot of pain, a lot of anger, and I think that ended up in the Supreme Court trying to decide and settle court cases, and then the Methodists finally got back together in 1939, I think. The United Methodist denomination is 50-some years old. So we haven't been around that long. What have we learned? We learned that when we merged the Evangelical United Brethren and the Methodist Episcopal Church, that it was painful. It was painful. There were many Evangelical United Brethren members across the United States that wanted nothing to do with the Methodist Episcopal Church, and they left. So whenever there's been a change or a realignment, that's always going to happen. You can go update it when the Pentecostal movement started. The Pentecostal church came out of the Methodist church. I think it was out on the West Coast. Pentecostal said, you Methodist Episcopals, a bunch of unbelieving heathens, we're going to start our own thing that's true to God. And so there was pain and there was upset, and the Pentecostal movement started, and now, of course, they're still a fast-growing denomination. So we have precedents both for and against. It's felt that this time our fighting and our arguing is trench warfare. Nobody's convincing anybody else anymore. We're just throwing bombs at each other. And so that's what was felt of getting to the point to say, you know, I love you. I love you too much to fight. You go your way. It's Acts 15. Sound right, Aaron? Acts 15. Paul and Barnabas. Do you know that story? Paul and Barnabas had they had disagreements. So what happened? Is that Paul took Silas and Barnabas took Mark. And they said, you go and do your ministry. God bless you. We're going to go and do our ministry. And we're not going to fight. And we're not going to hate. We're not going to be angry. So that's another precedent that we're looking at right now. Will there be pain? Yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. There'll be some pain. There'll be some hurt. But the hope part, and I don't know if anybody got, Alec, I don't know if anybody got my subtle thing of the slides we were using. Did anybody catch the little subtle thing on my slides? They were Good Friday, then we switched to an empty tomb. And that's subtle because I wanted to remind us in this room tonight, we're resurrection people. No matter where you are on social issues, I assume we're resurrection people. And so we believe that God is in control, and we believe that the church belongs to God, and that we'll be used whatever flavor or label we have on our sign. So, yeah. Maureen?
I just had a quick question. On this flow chart thing now, on the left-hand side, that would be, a decision would be made by December of 2024, correct? And then on the right-hand side, could that happen like any time after the general conference?
Yeah, the by 2024 means that a local church, if that all came to pass, would have that long to make up their mind.
But on the right-hand side of the general conference went with the...
It says...
The strengthen the 2019 traditional plan.
If that happened...
Would it happen faster than the 2024?
If that happened, then that side of the flow chart, and Chad, if you want to say anything to it, basically, as Chad said, if nothing really happens up at General Conference that changes anything, then one of the options would be for local churches, and we have that option right now, of saying, we don't want to be part of a denomination that has, those kinds of prohibitions and language. So there is a process for a church to go independent, non-denominational, and part of that process is more expensive, and it would be a negotiation for your building. I've watched churches, United Methodist churches, go through that. A lot of times what happens is the conference will come in and they'll take a look at a building that's 120 years old, in a small town or out in the country, and the church will say, well, we don't want to be part of the United Methodist Conference anymore. And so the conference will say, yeah, you know what? Your building's a liability. Go in peace. I don't know if that would happen to Grandview. What do you think? I think if we wanted to go non-denominational, I think this beautiful 16-year-old building and 30, 40 acres of land might be sought after. Is that fair? So that's something, but put it out there. That's part of our reality of, what does that look like if we wanted to go non-denominational? So let me try and sum it up another way. When the Wesleyan Covenant Association, after Portland, go back to 2016, in effect, broad brushstrokes said, thank you, Joey. They said, it's not just about the human sexuality. They said there's other issues that are out there for some more traditional churches, like the size of our bureaucracy and getting away from some orthodoxy and some practices in some parts of the country that you all sitting in here as United Methodists may visit some churches and you wouldn't recognize them as a Christian church. So there are other issues beyond human sexuality. But the WCA came up and said, hey, we want to create a place, a new denomination, a new affiliation for churches and clergy to land if they just can't live in a United Methodist Church that seems to be going more and more progressive. That was the genesis of the Wesleyan Covenant Association. So then when we got to St. Louis, there really was, again, kind of this idea that we're going to go one church plan, and that was kind of a mess. I mean, I can't remember it anymore. I've blanked that out of my memory. Have you too, all of you? That was just a year ago. So when the traditional plan was modified and everything at St. Louis, people were surprised. So when that all happened, and then we saw all the fighting and all the anger and all the hate and all the, when we left St. Louis, anybody that affiliated with the traditional side of the church was made to feel stupid and dumb and mean and horrible, right? How is that going to work living together in the same church, right? If one side, if you will, looks at the other side and says, you're a bunch of morons, you're backwards, stupid, homophobic, racist, sex, it isn't going to work. And that came out of that. So the Wesleyan Covenant Association and Good News Magazine, the Confessing Movement, there's several different movements, said we need to create the structures so that people that consider themselves traditional will have a place to land. That's one way to understand this. So that it's not like, we can't be here, so we'll just go join a non-denominational church or the Baptist church or the fill-in-the-blank church, right? That was the intention. The Wesleyan Covenant Association said, can we create a structure and an affiliation so that people that are more traditional, more conservative, will still in effect be in the Wesleyan movement, be in the Methodist tent, okay? That's a way to understand what's moved us to this point, okay? And again, the traditional folks are saying, we're done fighting, we want to make disciples. And I think the progressive side says, we want to make disciples too, and we're tired of fighting. So,
excuse me, you mentioned the CAT survey and how that sort of gave us an idea of how Grandview laid. But the CAT survey was really open to anybody, whether they had attended 3 times or if they'd been a member of Grandview for 30 years. If it does come down to a vote with Grandview, is it a correct assumption that the vote is only open to members?
I think there's actually a stipulation. Under the protocols. Yeah. Kathy, that's such a good observation because certainly here at Grandview, and I apologize to folks in other churches, we've tended to elevate attenders and people that are part of the family, and there's some people that have been worshiping here for 10 years that haven't joined for various reasons, but they're very much a part of it. So that does get complicated, doesn't it? And I think that's fair to say that I think that's another reason why I don't even want to hazard a guess of where this congregation would be because we're that diverse if it came down to A or B, and what's it look like? And we've had a lot of conversations with leadership about, there has been a desire from people in leadership. I looked at Chad because we've had this conversation a number of times. I was saying, we just don't want to fight about this as a congregation. We want to stay and be this church, and we want to keep growing, and we want to keep doing good things. And that's what puts us in a tough spot. Would you agree with that, Chad? Okay. Yeah, again, I don't want anybody to think, if you're watching this, if you're here tonight in person, that we're trying to sugarcoat something and say, this is going to be a cakewalk. The cakewalk will be February 23rd here. We'll have a cakewalk. Right, Nikki? But all this we're talking about with protocols and so forth isn't the cakewalk. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. And again, the FAQs, you have those frequently asked questions, and those came from Kendra and from your cell group, right? And they were great questions, and I tried to answer them. And we're trying to dig into that, and I let you take those home. I think if you're watching on the live stream, there's a link to the packet. Alec? Okay. So, if you want to grab that, you can grab that. And again, the intention here is to try and be helpful and not hurtful. And again, we still have a few minutes if you have questions, but, stay informed, as other people have said. Stay informed. And, not only read more, so there's that whole page of links, and this was sent out a couple weeks ago on an email, and you could have clicked on them more easy, but those really are balanced. Those really are balanced links. As Kendra said, the United Methodist News Service is going to give you pretty unbiased stuff, and some of these other blogs, they've got an opinion, they've got a thought, but it's good to read some of those other thoughts and opinions. But you can click on any of those as well. Contact the General Conference delegates. We had kind of some painful times here at Grandview last February and March, and I remember this, so distinctly is sitting with a group of people, and I said, when I was a delegate to General Conference, as I got closer to General Conference, I sometimes would get up to 10 emails and snail mail letters a day. 10. And I said to my church, I said, I only heard from 3 or 4 of you, right? And so, it was talking through, and us as a kind of a church family growing through that difficult time. But at the very bottom of your sheet, contact General Conference delegates. There's a link. And that's what, if you get elected to General Conference, that's what you expect. You expect to hear from people from all over, because that's the way the process works. And so our General Conference delegates, you can shoot them an email, you can write them a snail mail letter, and say, here's, I'm speaking for myself. I mean, you can't speak for Grandview, you can't speak for East Dubuque or Sherrill, fair enough, but you can speak for yourself. I'm a member at Grandview, and here's what I hope will happen at General Conference. Let them know. Let them know how you feel. Pat.
First of all, I want to thank you for keeping us so well informed on these issues.
Well, we hope so. We hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat.
My question is this. I know some members of Methodist churches in Wisconsin, and it seems to me that they aren't being informed. Now, why is that? And is it possible that I can pass this information on to them?
Yes. We tried to make this information, Pat, so that any group that are interested could use it. And that's why we've worked hard to try to present just here's the facts, here's to understand the players and some of the things behind it. And I think that's just a high value that we have here, that the more information is better. Now, Dr. Collier's told me, Dr. Elmer Collier, some of you know him, some of you don't. He's an elder in the Wisconsin Annual Conference. The Wisconsin Annual Conference is much different than the Iowa Annual Conference. And so I don't know, maybe they grow mushrooms there, you know what I mean? You get it? Okay. Keep them in the dark. And anyway, I don't know. We laugh here. We have fun. So I don't know. I can't speak for that, but I think that's a shame. That's my personal feeling. I think everybody that has an interest in the United Methodist Church should know as much as possible, so nobody's taken by surprise. That's always been our intention here. Is we don't want anybody to read about something in the news again after General Conference in Minneapolis and come in here, with a whole full head of steam going, what in the world just happened? Why didn't you let us know? That can't be said here, because we're doing everything we can to let you know. and to answer your questions and to listen to that. And that's still our intentions. And at the bottom of the FAQs is that, who can we talk to if we have questions? The folks up here on the stage are doing their best to stay, including me, to stay informed, to keep up with it. I got to admit, I was reading last night and today, and you can read some of this stuff until your eyes cross. There's a lot out there right now. And, and there's going to keep being a lot out there, so we're going to try and keep you informed of what's happening. And that's my promise, okay? Anything else?
Tom, I may be trying to wrap my arms around this like maybe Aaron or someone, but we had a book of discipline, traditional, all this, and I'd love to find another word for progressive. You guys have your rules. You're doing it a certain way. Things are going okay. I want to come into the group. I want to change what's going on. And I want you to leave the group that I came into. Am I wrong on that? Or that's kind of grasping that.
Again, Keith, I think that's one way to look at it.
Okay. And I may be totally wrong. I'm just.
It's simplified it. And I think my answer to that is, it could seem that way. But I think that the folks that would identify as traditional, again, would say, we don't see any end to this impasse. And it's robbing us of people and energy and money.
A focus
so we're
on
willing
God and doing everything else that we all want to do.
Yep.
So there's a division that's...
Like I said, I just kind of made it up on the fly, but it's like, I want you to go live your life and have your life, and I want to live my life. And so just, look, take the house and take the cars and take most of the bank accounts, because I'm, I know that I earn most, whatever. I don't want to get into that, but you know what I'm saying? That's how I try and make sense of it, because I know I read a lot of stuff, and there are people that would identify as traditional that are mad as hell about this, going, what do you mean we have to leave? It's kind of where the Africans are. And again, not throwing anybody under the bus, but certainly not just Nigerians, but Liberians and Congolese, everybody. They're looking at it from across the water going, what? What do you mean? We won. And of course, that's part of the problem too, is winners and losers, right? So it's difficult for some people, yes.
Can we lose and stay?
What?
Can we lose and stay?
Yeah. So I've had this cold, and I'm not thinking real well. But no, I think those are great questions, and I don't know if anybody else has a response to Keith, because I don't mean to blow it off. I think you just said something that for many people in this room, and people listening, getting our arms around this. Like, really, are we at this point? And part of tonight is to say, yeah, we are. We are. Okay? And on both sides, three sides, there's going to be a sense that it's not fair. That's what Todd had talked to us about that when we first got together. From the legal world, if you have a mediator come in and work out a compromise, nobody gets to feel like they won, right? Both sides are kind of unhappy, and that's where we are. KT?
I hope I could word this right. Didn't you say one time that if the rules don't change or however, you can get in trouble for trying to accommodate somebody that isn't written in the book of whatever?
So, you mean if I, as a pastor, said, yep, I'm going to do a same gender wedding here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a chargeable offense.
Yes.
And
so I just want people to, maybe you could help by saying something like that?
Well, that's what part of the thing is. It's saying, okay, probably a new, what they call a post-separation United Methodist Church, traditional, go this way, post-separation church would probably pretty quickly change. If you go back to your yellow sheet on the back, that's why I gave it to you. They would first probably strike the language, the United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this incompatible with Christian teaching. That's probably going to get stricken right away. And then, language that says marriage. We believe in the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman. That'll be struck. And then go back up to 341.6. Ceremonies that celebrate homosexual unions shall not be conducted by our ministers and shall not be conducted in our churches. that'll go in the new post-separation Methodist Church. The traditional Methodist Church would keep all of that, I think. Okay? Yep. Folks, we are at the end of our time together. Art, you get the last word.
Just one final thought.
Yep.
It wasn't so long ago, 16 years or so, when this church faced a decision about whether it was going to stay where it was or whether we were going to build this church. And it split the congregation down the middle. It not only split the congregation, it split my family. My kids voted to stay where they grew up. And Judy and I voted to come here. And you know what? God took care of us no matter what we decided.
The church belongs to God. Hey, thank you all for coming and hanging out. Again, my prayer at the beginning was that God would produce fruit from this time together. Fruit, Christ-like fruit, not anger, not accusations, not trying to figure out who's who so you can shun them. That's not the way we play the game. If you're with me on that, say yes. So as God's people, I invite you to stand up and to reach out and hold on to somebody's hand as an affirmation that we don't have to have the same opinions on some things. Yeah, we turn around here, Dave. Sorry. Yeah, we look outside. I forgot to tell him it's a Pavlovian dog thing. So that's okay. So we are in this together, folks. Let not your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust that God will be with you, will be with us in our Christian communities. So don't be afraid and don't be anxious. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, may God bless you, provide for you, and protect you. Amen. Thanks for hanging in.